Hi, more and more people are trying to build art tech communities or tech art communities here in Berlin, but in other different places in the world. The idea is that by bringing artists together with developers, we will not reach only art tech solutions, but we may have the possibility to innovate other businesses. Today, we have the pleasure to welcome Lee with us.
Yes,
Hi.
Lei.
Lei. Okay, sorry, Lei.
That's fine.
And you will be talking or sharing your insights about building art tech communities and what can we also expect from this field. Yeah. So you have been doing that actually in Japan before. You have been doing it like also in Berlin. So the main question or the first question that I would like to ask you is like, what's the difference between building an art tech community in Asia, in Japan or China, or here in Berlin?
Cool. And we're gonna ignore that you call it art tech, I call it tech art.
Um, yes, so not really. I mean, tech art, I believe it's coming really more from the art field, and art tech is coming from
The tech
the
field.
tech
And you're the
field.
tech guy, I'm the art
Yeah,
lady.
yeah. So it's up to you. You
You
choose
can choose tech
art tech
art
or
or
tech art, you know?
yeah, I'm gonna call it tech art just for the purpose.
Yeah,
And then you're gonna call it art tech.
yeah. Let's
Okay.
do that.
But it's the same thing, more or less. And I think what's interesting about the term is that it's really like two different sectors of people trying to come together and build something. And that's why it's art and tech, whether you call it art tech or tech art. I was in Japan in 2000, I believe 2015 and 16. And I spent a year there, and I was given the opportunity to work with a lot of filmmakers in Tokyo to build this like film society. So we're trying to mix more films together, and then we're trying to basically do screenings. So a lot of what people would do here in Berlin. Um, it was quite a difficult experience if I were like honest about it, because in Japan people tend to work a lot, and I think that's like the case in Asia in general. People work too much that it's really hard for them to get out of their job and actually spend time on creating a community. I think that would be a really big difference, and this is also the reason that kind of like draws me to Berlin, because I think Berlin is a place where a lot of startups like yours exist, which is really exciting. And all these startups are very invested in building communities. And there are also a lot of people who are like designers, artists, or people who are like even software engineers, like really techy people. But by like they're just either working more like a freelancer like myself, or they're working on their job, but then they also take a lot of time in building communities. And I really appreciate that. And I think that's like one thing that really attracts me or makes me want to stay in Berlin. But I think in general too, it's not really about Asia and Europe. This is how I saw it, because I'm working quite a lot in Shenzhen, in China, like the big like tech hub that everybody is talking about. And I was in Tokyo, I was in New York, and now I live in Berlin. I think it really depends on the city, as opposed to whether it's Asia or Europe. Every city has different rhythm, it has different values, people work differently, and depends on which city it is, you'll have a different atmosphere for community. Yeah.
Cool. And why art tech now? Why did you choose to focus on that or tech art? Who keeps doing
Art
that?
tag. We've been doing that throughout this
No,
whole
no, no.
thing. Um, I think for me it's quite a personal question, because I came from like an academic background. I did philosophy of science at Princeton University, and so I already came from quite like a techie background. But my undergrad was in comparative literature, and I did like 4 years of painting. And then in 2014, I took like a master course here in Berlin in film, and then I started to make film. So for me, I've always done both tech and art. I don't see why they cannot be together. And when I was given the opportunity to work really in the art world here in Berlin, it was just on accident. Like I was given the opportunity of doing an internship or working at a gallery and stuff. I just realized um, I I mean, there are two ways of answering this question. On a personal level, I really think that tech art is the future, because I think um, you have to, like when you're doing art. as an artist or as a curator, art is about making a comment on society. Of course, there are different aspects of art. There's the aesthetic values, there is the aspect of making commentary on a society, there's some more technical aspects in terms of like what medium you use and stuff like that. And I think when it comes to like the social commentary function of art, it's really important that art responds to what's happening to society. And in our society, like it's not that like previous societies were not technical at all, but I'm definitely seeing our society facing a really big change or a big juncture or like historical conjuncture, you can call it, which means that we're moving from one way of interacting with people or like of certain like social functions, industrial functions, to a completely different way or different means of production, however you want to call it. And I think at this moment, it's really interesting to be able to use art or to do art that can actually comment on the changes. And I think that's why for me, tech art is really interesting. And yeah, that would be a way of answering this question.
Yeah, and actually from your experience trying to build an art community here in Berlin, what are the main learnings? You have been doing it like for a year now here in Berlin?
Yeah, 2 years.
2 years here in Berlin. So what are the main learnings, challenges that you see we're facing you here in Berlin?
What are the challenges you face?
Oh, we are not so many challenges. We can have like another YouTube video about just that. Yeah, and also learnings. Yeah.
I think documenting the experience of a art tech startup is super interesting. You know.
Yeah, we do that. We will share it once. We do that.
Yeah, like the challenges, I don't know. I really appreciate the Berlin like art communities in general. Because there are people who are really, like I said, really actively trying to build communities or even startup like yours, trying to be more communal and like making people doing things together and doing collaborative projects together. I think the challenge I see is the challenge of every community. It's always hard to build a community. Like when I was like back in school, I was always dreaming of how communities should be like in the 30s or like 20s in Europe, you know, where they're just different groups of communities, and it was really exciting. And I think we're facing the same questions that all our ancestors were facing. You know, people have different values. Collaboration is always hard. You face that in your startups too. You know, just personnel reasons, and I think that's the problem of every community. And another thing would be, I think, what I can contribute and what I see problematic in Berlin and in a lot of art world is the big disjunction or the big separation between the more professional art world and people who are in like more underground or grassroots communities. So what happened is, for instance, in the art world that I was working in, you have people who came directly from UDK, which is the University of
we welcomed them like a few days ago.
Yeah, or like come from basically a good art school here in Berlin or outside of Berlin, from China, from America. Then they move directly to a very professional path, and that's how they get picked up by residencies and awards and fellowships, and then that's how they get picked up by galleries and then further museums and stuff like that. So that's a very, very like bureaucratic, not democratic, actually opposite, a very bureaucratic and professional path.
Yeah.
But I personally believe that art should not be that way. I believe in craftsmanship and people like, you know, gaining their techniques and stuff, just like filmmaking. So that way, that kind of being professional, I would agree with. But I personally don't agree that one would necessarily have to go through this kind of path to become a successful artist or, you know, a professional artist. I think that your inner drive to have something to express, embracing the stories and wanting to make important commentaries on society or wanting to express beauty is a big part of making art. But I think this is made very difficult even in Berlin. Like you have completely two different communities that I kind of both take part in. One would be the more professional art world that have people directly from art school and go into museums and galleries. One would be the other way, which is local communities, like the one that you're trying to build around xibit, or like there are other smaller communities and the ones that I was trying to build as well. And these people don't really have so much intersection, so they're not really connected. So you have like a big group of actually really active artists who are producing really interesting collaborative projects, but it's hard to find them in like what we call proper art galleries or museums in Berlin, because they just don't have the access, because they didn't came from the academic or the more bureaucratic path. And I think that's really unfortunate. It's the same with like startups. I think startups in Berlin, like at least this is what I observe, you guys are given opportunities to be on very equal levels with bigger corporations and stuff. You're able to receive funding if you're doing the right thing or be in the right competition and stuff. But unfortunately, for artists, it's a little bit harder. Like if you're not from that path, it's hard to get access to like more artist residencies and stuff like that.
Yeah. So you see basically three stakeholders, like developers, the artists, or like underground artists, and then the professional artists. And if I understand you right, it's way much more easier to connect like developers with underground artists.
I think so.
Compared to the professional world.
Is that your experience too? I don't know.
It's kind of in between. I think we are connected, let's say, at the same level, but it comes also with our connections and the history and stuff. So I think we are really connected at the same level or to the same degree with both like the professional art world and also the underground, because when we started, we targeted more the professional art world. That was the definition of like art or the art market for us. And then we got to know the underground, let's say, art world more because they are the early adopters of the technology that we are using.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And this is how we connected again with the other, let's
Which
say, world.
communities you find more interesting? Which art world you find more interesting?
It's very hard to say. I think both of them, you know? Yeah, I mean, I would say like really, yeah, both of them, because the others, I mean, I always believe like, when you have certain opportunities or you have a career or whatever, it proves also something, it's not that you need to completely ignore and say these guys are better than the others. The underground, I would say, they are, from my perspective, the early adopters. And it's also like very interesting to see, because some of the people that we talk to in like from these underground artists, they have been doing virtual reality art for like 10 years. It's
exactly,
yeah, it's like so many years, I would say like really both of them are interesting.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. Cool. And also I know that you are working on multiple projects in China. We also like talked about certain projects together.
Let's talk about China.
China. Let's talk about China. So how do you see actually startups based here in Berlin, in Germany, or maybe even in Europe?
I love this question. Yes, go ahead.
Can actually work together with the Chinese ecosystem? How can they contribute to each other and really add value to each other? Go ahead.
I love this because this is like my passion. I think the Berlin, German, or European startups communities, or just startups in general, have a lot to contribute to China. Like because I'm kind of like in between. I think on many levels, not only on the technological level, because I think some people might have bias thinking that China is technological backward. That's not the case. But I think different areas, different countries are doing their own innovation. So there's definitely a lot of technologies and a lot of technological innovations that European startups can contribute. But I think also on like a personal level as well, or on like a personnel level, people here really have very good values. Because China is like market driven. Anything that sells, anything that make like extra value, you're gonna take off. They don't really care how you're gonna change the society or like It's a good thing. If you read the book by Kai-Fu Lee I mentioned to you like a bit earlier, AI Superpowers, highly recommend. It really describes the market, or specifically the AI market in China very well. That anything has to be applied to the market, has to take off immediately, and this is what the investors are interested in. Whereas what I see in Europe, a lot of startups, they really care about social values, they care about the environment, they care about building communities, and they have more of like a long-term goal. Like the Chinese startups and the Chinese basically like tech art world has a lot to do with just putting the product on the ground, it has to run, and this is how we like test a product. Whereas here, you really want to care about how is this product going to contribute to the society in 5 to 10 years. And I think that's something like value-wise, I think a city like where I'm from, Shenzhen, can really appreciate. But in general, like just put all of these aside, I think in general, I'm really up for any kind of like technological and cultural exchange, because I think that's how we keep our world kind of stable and also interesting. This is how people will not just build like stereotypes about another countries and about another people, but instead you come together and collaborate. And for instance, in the world that I work in Shenzhen, I really see that a lot of young people and a lot of like university students in Shenzhen, we have like two big universities, they can really benefit from having some Berlin startups being there and just do research for a month or for a year or for half a year, and to show them what it's like to actually build a product. Like after you learn everything you learn from school, what it's like to actually use what you learn as knowledge to implement onto something. What it's like to see a startup take off, and what are the necessities, what are the challenges. And I think students and young people in Shenzhen, they really have a very good basis for such entrepreneurial adventures, because they have good universities, they have a lot of governmental support, and they have like big companies who are interested and investors who are interested in investing on specifically technological startups. But they don't really have the gut or like the experience just yet. Yeah. And by bringing in like Berlin startups, students can really benefit from having those practical experiences, or just having a vision of what it's like to build your own business and own company. And I think that's something that I'm really interested in. And from the perspective of like Berlin startups as well, you always think of the East as this like unknowable black hole or like mess that you're really afraid of, but it's actually not like that. Yeah. And people are talking about like censorship and like all these kind of stuff, but it's actually very very exciting once you enter the world. All of these other like more ideological questions will directly disappear from your head once you are there in Shenzhen or in China. You're faced with a lot of practical issues, and then you're actually faced with a lot of opportunities. Because what I see in Berlin is that a lot of startups and a lot of like independent artists, they lack opportunities and resources and financial resources. And I think China is this big field, because a lot of things are still changing. You actually have the opportunity to implement your idea and to actually make it scale. And I think that's what Berlin or German startups can actually benefit from, just venturing into China. Like my dad, he had 3 startups in his life. And I think there's one thing that is really right about it. It's like, never worry about anybody like stealing your idea or like anything. Just not worried about like anything until the product takes off. Have as many people helpful on your team, has as many resources as you need, help the product and the startup to take off. Then you discuss about profits and ownership and stuff like that. And I think he's really right about that. And I think China would be perfect for startups who actually just want to take the next steps and to just test this ground a little bit.
Yeah. Is there anything specific to art tech startups? Like when moving or
this
trying
is
to
exactly
collaborate?
What we need. Yeah. We don't have that many art tech startups. Like there was a bubble in Shenzhen a few years back of the VR startups. Like there were, I don't know, like maybe 200 startups, and I haven't checked the numbers, but very few of them actually are still like surviving. So China, I wouldn't say it's exactly an environment where like art tech or tech art startups would survive very easily, at least not in Shenzhen because it's a tech hub after all. There's not really like a traditional art market as it is. But I think the government itself, because I was working with the government, is actually looking very actively to have more startups that have a cultural element or like an art element to it. This is the direction it's going into because it realizes that in order for the city to become like more international, it needs a cultural circle. It needs artistic content for young people to be willing to live in Shenzhen. In that sense, like Berlin is the perfect example. You have startups, but you also have like very active art world here, and this is what keep young people wanting to come in. You know, not necessarily for like a big fat salary, but for just being in the world, you know, of Berlin. And I think Shenzhen government is very actively looking to do that. And I think maybe university would be the perfect like entrance because that's where you get a lot of space to do stuff without much consequences.
Yeah, and maybe also young people, early
Yeah, and young
adopters.
people as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Thanks a lot. Do you have any last word, comments, advice, feedback that you want to share with our audience?
I guess my main message here is really for if you're watching this from China, which is unlikely because this is YouTube, it's not available in China. But if you're watching this from China, come to Berlin. You'll find really like fascinating, active startups people and young people like Zach and me. If you're watching this from Europe or from Berlin specifically, go to China, go to Shenzhen, contact me. Zach will leave the information down below.
You'll find the information
Yeah,
below.
I'll gear you towards the right people or whatever. We need interesting people young people from Berlin to go to China and see the world there.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks a lot. It was really super cool. Thanks a lot, and feel free to leave your comments, to contact Lei.
Yes.
Yeah, and
I have my own YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, cool. I will also link it below. So thanks a lot for watching and stay tuned. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.